If you were at St. Stephen's College, Stanley, Hong Kong, between 1960 and 1970, you might have experienced a very interesting time. We perhaps had the worst school certificate results when I was there. We attained the impossible by getting H and G's. Before the results were announced, Richard Hanforth, our warden, wondered if I might also fail that examination, as I was too active in extracurricular activities. Thank God I survived. Years later, I even got a letter of admission from the University of Oxford. What I'm saying is that pupils who were there between the 60s and the 70s had a very unique experience of education. I remember vaguely that we had only one school rule: use your common sense. The school did not quote the Bible or the teaching of Confucius. We were encouraged by our warden to try anything that interests us. I also remember Canon Martin, who actually lost his wife during the Japanese occupation. He used to kneel down and pray with the students when he was warden, when the students had some very serious disciplinary plights. The late 80s was also a time of trouble. There were serious problems in Hong Kong as in other parts of the world. In China, there is the Cultural Revolution. In the West, there are the student protests. During that time, many pupils left school. This included my best friend George Xu, whose father was a titan in the business world, and also a friend Li Manfo, who was my friend from primary school days. They went to the States, and so it was a time when many people left Hong Kong. The late 60s was also a time when there were changes. First, we admitted girls for the first time. We had a strike because of the rise of school fees. We even had a school bazaar to raise money for the school. Now, if you have time, you might want to listen to some radio programs on YouTube. One very special program that I loved is 40 Years On. Sir John Gielgud was actually in it. Actually, the title 40 Years On comes from the boat song in the Old Oxford Songbook. When I told Mr. James Lee, who was our English master, that I wanted to be a schoolmaster, he told me that I should read Goodbye, Mr. Chips. He also made me read Tom Brown's School Days. When I reached the last chapter of Tom Brown's School Days, I was actually moved into tears. It was Tom Brown thinking of his good old days at rugby and his old headmaster, Thomas Arnold. In a way, our school was very much like the school of Mr. Chips and that of Tom Brown. We did not excel in school certificate examinations those days. Now we're doing very well. We did not win prizes in the Hong Kong Music Festival. Now we have won many prizes and we're well known as key contestant in the Hong Kong Inter-School Music Festival. We were actually very different from our cousin schools, such as St. Paul's Co-ed or St. Stephen's Girls. They did much better than us. Here I would like to really work on one important point, and that is, why are we so different? What is so special about St. Stephen's? To begin with, let us start with the historical and the cultural context on the founding of the school. Canon Henforth once remarked to me with a sort of very British observation. He pointed out that our school was destined for great things, such as changing the history of China. Yet, alas, things did not turn out to be so. It was really when I started looking deeply at the history of our school that I realized the true founder of the school was no less than Dr. Sun Yat-sen, the founder of modern China. You probably remember he was even arrested and put in a solitary arrest in the Qing embassy in London, and it was his teacher who rescued him. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that perhaps Dr. Sun Yat-sen was aware of the fact that China already had several good universities in Peking, in Shanghai, and in Canton. Yet there was not a single good boarding school like Eton and Harrow. Perhaps you remember the observation of Wellington. It might not be true, but this was reputed to be said by him, that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the sports grounds of Eton. What I'm trying to say is that the founder of the Republic felt we should have a school like Eton. In that school, we'll be able to produce generals and soldiers that could defeat the great Napoleon, a school that could help to create and form great prime ministers and other leaders in the time of the Industrial Revolution, as well as the Victorian reign. And so let's go back to the story. When Dr. Sun Yat-sen had that idea, he of course went to his business friends in Hong Kong who were wealthy, and they came up with the money. One perhaps name you remember, which actually graced the hall, one of the halls in our school, Mok Kon Sang Tower, or known as Mok Tower. Well, these businessmen, they came up with the money. Then it was the Hong Kong government that provided us with the land. And the funny thing was, the first site of St. Stephen's College, when it was supposed to move from the old site to a better place, was actually Clearwater Bay, Qing Shui Wan. But something happened. A snake went into the trousers of one of these governors or people who came to look at the site. And so they decided that they didn't want to build our college on the site of our modern Clearwater Bay golf course. But instead, we had Stanley instead. It was actually a blessing in disguise, because in Stanley we have Stanley Mount and 2 beaches plus Stanley Village, which is of course something better than the golf course place of Qing Shui Wan, Clearwater Bay, which has really nothing. Anyway, but who is going to run the school? They approached the Bishop of Hong Kong, and Church Missionary Society was chosen, and they graciously agreed to run St. Stephen's. And this is really our connection, historically speaking, that we were founded by the founder of the country. And secondly, we had the best help from the colonial administrators, from the businessmen, and from the Church Missionary Society. They produced people like Canon Martin and Canon Hanforth. And these people were missionaries. These people wanted to do the will of God and to live the gospel of the Bible. And because they believe in these things, so they gave the students certain freedom that was not available to other best schools in Hong Kong. Hence, we have this very strange school rule: use your common sense. For these missionaries, we might err sometimes, but we are made in the image of God. Here, don't think that I'm trying to preach you any gospel. What I'm trying to say is, it is their spiritual belief that gave us this freedom. And so mistakes that are really quite small, if we think of them, do not really matter in the long run. So take Tom Brown in Tom Brown's school days for an example. Tom Brown was the son of a country squire. He was full of spirits and he was a bit wild. But all young men were like that. And likewise, the masters of Mr. Chips, there's a Mr. Chips himself, was not at the top of the cream of the graduates of Cambridge. And he had problems having the disciplinary measures in his role as a teacher. But he turned out to be the best teacher. He did not produce many great scholars and many people who would get very good results. And yet he was remembered. During my years at St. Stephen's, 1/3 of our boarders would go to Stanley Village to invigilate prep in the St. Gongwei Primary School. Some of the seniors of our school would visit the Stanley Training Center, which is really a correctional home for people beneath the age of 17. And some of the students will organize summer activities for the village children. And perhaps people will remember that we had our fasting or suffering group. We used to meet on Wednesday during lunchtime, and we will only have cheese sandwiches in the chapel. And we will probably listen to some sermon by Mr. Estes, short ones. And that was really how we managed to learn solidarity with the poor. And we even raised some money and was sent for some good purposes. So on September 5th, 2025, my daughter Frances and I pay a visit to Canon Hanforth in his retirement home in Bromley, London. He was over 90s, and yet he was lucid. We had a meal together. I specially ordered stir-fried rice noodles, 乾炒牛河. That was our regular breakfast at our prep school on Fridays. He lived in a cottage built during the English Civil War. In his place, there were only 2 bedrooms, and the furnishings were Spartan. What struck me most was that on his wall there was just a calligraphy, a Chinese calligraphy. Now that was unusual because I knew that Canon Hanforth was a lover of modern arts. When I used to meet him in London, he would take me to the Tate Modern Art Gallery before we would have a meal at the Soho restaurants. And once I conducted a study tour at St. Cross College, Oxford, and he came to give a talk. It was he who enlightened me to all the wall paintings on the wall. And so I knew that he actually was a great lover of art. And yet, on his wall, the only art was a Chinese calligraphy given to him by probably a teacher of St. Stephen's or a member of the congregation when he got married. And there was really very few luxuries in his retirement home, except some books on the shelves. So that made me start wondering, why? Because during my last speech day in St. Stephen's, on the day when we received our graduation certificate, we sang the song from To Serve with Love. And one of the lyrics was, "What can I do for you in return?" So I thought that I should do something in return, although it was many, many years ago. My graduation was in 1971, and now it is 2025. So while musing on these things on my way back to Taiwan, I happened to stay at the Pontifical University of St. Anthony in Rome. During our meals, I met a Capuchin friar of the Order of St. Francis. He planned to build an old home for the old and the dying in Kerala, India. He asked me for help as his fundraising got into difficulties. It was then it transpired to me that helping them, maybe it might be a way that we can show in our, let's say, old age, something to give in return for all the blessings we received when we were at school in St. Stephen's. I thought of the many unconventional masters. I thought of Mr. James Lee, who gave me a teaching vocation. I was grateful to Mr. Clive Oxley, who gave me free piano lessons. He founded the Life Saving Club, and I was his worst lifeguard. Yet I managed to save 2 lives in the River Cherwell in Oxford in the 70s. There were teachers who would help our girls, students, in their volleyball practices, and they did very well eventually in the volleyball world in Hong Kong, in the school competitions. There was Nurse Alice Fong, who was always kind, and she would give sick leaves to anyone who asked for it, which meant that we could be exempt from classes, and then we would have ham sandwiches in our sick bed. I remember the days of my days in the prep school, where the laws, that is Law Sang and Law Tai, who actually would teach music besides the regular courses. There was Mrs. Lin, who deputized and became acting supervisor of the prep school during the Reverend Luther Lu's training in the UK. And then, of course, we don't forget the eternal Yale Ma, our sport master, who would take us to play in the cemetery during the weekends. It was actually very dangerous because playing in the cemetery in the dark of the night with cliffs next to the graves would be actually a great disaster should anything should happen. And this is what inspires me to think of doing something in return. The old home in Carrara will actually house 60 old people who are in need. Some of them are dying. Some are deserted by their children. And Southern India was important because many missionaries, including the Church Missionary Society, would actually send their missionaries first to India because this was a boat trip. They would rest there and move on to the east. And in the Catholic world, famous missionaries such as St. Francis Xavier and Matthew Ricci also stayed in South India when they were on the way to the east, or when they were coming back from the east to Europe. The money needed was actually very little. It was just about less than $500,000 US. And what that money would get in Taiwan would be just a small apartment in Taipei. And yet, if we are able to help them, we'll be able to do something that is something in the line of doing something in return and thanking people in return. The friars have some difficulties in raising the funds. And this is why they ask for my help, or perhaps the help of St. Stephen's boys. And should you help, there will probably be a wall remembering or commemorating all the people who helped in this project. And it is very much like the Oxford and Cambridge colleges, who were endowed by people, and the colleges will always remember them during their meals and during their chapel times. So, what I'm trying to do is to just raise this question. And perhaps if you're interested, you might be able to do something. I will leave you my email and write to me, or you can even call me via FaceTime. Thank you very much. God bless you.